Lance says my crank arms are seized. Any advice, please? Oh no, guys. We need to say a short prayer for Lance. This is frustrating, man. When in doubt, Lance, get a bigger hammer and hammer it out. If your crank arms are on your bike and if they're seized on like that, it's going to be really tough to get it off for a number of reasons. But you don't really have any, like, make sure your bike, when you're hitting your crank arms, isn't moving. You can't lay it down on the side and hammer the crank arms downward because the bike's resting on the crank arm. Now, what I normally would do, and it also, there's not very good leverage from there either, but what I would normally do is I'd try and lay my bike down flat and prop it up on some kind of wood, like put a 4x4 or something like that and a 4x4 over here, and then set my bike down on top of that so the cranks are in between the two, and so that it's laying flat and that my crank arms are off the ground. What usually happens is when we're trying to hammer on something, we don't have anything like resting up against the rest of the bike. And so when you hammer your crank arm, your bike's going to move the whole bike. And what pulls the crank arm off is force going that way on the crank and force coming this way on everything else. If the force going this way on the crank is also going this way with everything else, you're not actually doing anything to pull the crank arm off. So make sure that your frame and everything else is in a position to not move so that the crank arm actually takes that force and starts to come off. That's the biggest thing there. And this is kind of hard to do. So like I said, lay it flat. It's usually the way that I do it, on top of something so it's lifted up off the ground. PB blaster, if you can get any PB blaster in there on the spindle or through the bolts there, put that on, let it sit for a few hours. That stuff, spray it so you've got to imagine the spindle and the crank arm seized on there, and you want the PB blaster to go in between that. So spray it however you can so that that PB blaster gets in between there and starts to loosen it up. The third thing, so make sure that the bike is in a position that the pressure can pull the crank arm off. 2, PB blaster or some kind of penetrating oil. 3, heat. If you can, get a torch or something like that and heat up the area. The torch will break it loose usually, and you can hammer it off. I don't like to do that. Torches, they're just a pain in the ass. It's a lot of work. I'd rather beat on it with a hammer for 30 minutes than torch it and beat on it with a hammer for 15. I just think it's better use of my time just to not play with fire. So